Before we get into it, I just want to make one thing clear. I do like Breath of the Wild, and I've had my fair share of playing it. That's important because I'm going to be criticizing one of gaming's most beloved games. I'm a longtime Zelda fan. In fact, it's one of my favorite series, and I've played through just about every title, except for these two here. Majora, I just never really got around to. I wasn't exactly an N64 kid, but eventually I'll dust off the old 3DS and give it a go. And then Skyward. I just grew out of the Wii by the time that game released. I was over motion controls, though happily the game's been ported to the Switch, so I'll give that a playthrough at some point. But all these games here, I have beaten, and all these games, I've played a reasonable portion of. Anyway, my point is, I'm going into Breath of the Wild as a longtime Zelda fan. The Switch released in 2017, and I picked one up the first chance I could, a couple months after release. And like everyone on the planet, I bought Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild alongside my Switch console. It was an incredible introduction to this new piece of hardware, the perfect game to launch with a brand new console. The Switch didn't have the massive library that it does today, and that hardly mattered, because you could spend hours upon hours in just this one game. But me, being the cynic that I am, wasn't totally blown away by this game like it seems everyone else is. I'll start with what I did like, then we can get into the meat of what this video is really about. The first notable thing anyone will point out about Breath of the Wild is the open world. The Legend of Zelda being an open world is a wonderful thing. The series has always been rooted in exploration. That's evident in the first game, and has been a staple all throughout. So essentially, we got rid of transition screens. The whole world is a cohesive plane, but they didn't stop there. Open world pretty much implies you'll have vast horizontal exploration, but Breath of the Wild takes it a step further with verticality. There's numerous mountains and towers to climb, and going down is just as rewarding as going up. The paraglider is an absolute game changer. This is one of the most satisfying things you can do in a game. Find a high peak and jump. Soar over the ground below, sail to new locations, and do it all again. Until you're detected by a guardian. These things are scary. They really keep you on your toes. Fighting them is often tough, so it's good to decide if it's really worth going forward at that time. In the meantime, you can do some side quests. None of these are super involved. I mean, there's no quest-specific dungeons you'll enter into, or big story revelations being told, but they give you an additional objective to complete as you continue exploring onward. Towns. Towns are one aspect of Zelda I've always felt they need more of. Usually you'll have your starting town, and some form of Kakariko, maybe some third settlement, and a castle town. But Breath of the Wild delivers with towns. Kakariko's a good start, but there's also Hateno. You've got your usual quest-related Death Mountain and Zora's Domain, but also Gerudo Town and Rito Village. And beyond that, we're given various settlements, outposts, and the less significant but still bustling village of Laurelin. Makes up for Hyrule Castle being in such disrepair. And finally, you're not going to find it in your average side quest, but there are these memory locations to seek out. The story overall is pretty fleshed out in this one. I'll be honest, The Legend of Zelda isn't always super story-oriented. There's always some sort of backstory, and certain motivations keeping you going throughout the game, but Breath of the Wild tells a bit more. And it's really nice to finally get full cutscenes that are also fully voiced. Well, not by Link. So that's all for my positive, specific section of this review. But to be clear, that's not the only things I like about this game. Just the other portions will be brought up as I cover other points. Breath of the Wild certainly switched things up compared to other titles in the series. I'm all for trying new things, though with this one, I feel it's all too sudden, too soon. To a point, it almost doesn't feel like a Zelda game to me. Maybe a Zelda-inspired game, or a Zelda spin-off game. I mean, it certainly spawned a sub-series within the Zelda franchise. New things were added, and that's great, but it came as a trade-off to some of the things I really admired about the series. Starting with dungeons. The Zelda experience is composed of two integral components, the explorable overworld and the numerous dungeons. I've always considered Legend of Zelda to be an RPG. Now I know there's some debate to be had about this. Sure, you don't level up or do turn-based battles, but not every RPG is the same combat. And in Zelda, you do improve with time. Health upgrades, new item abilities, occasionally a new sword, or even a new tunic to wear. We can discuss this more in depth another time, but another critical aspect of both RPGs and Zelda is the dungeons. A long-form trial of endurance with branching paths, treasures, and often puzzles to overcome. It's all capped off with a boss fight at the end. I love RPGs, and I love Zelda, and although entering a dungeon is often a daunting feeling, I wouldn't want to give it up for anything. Breath of the Wild really failed us on dungeons. It's almost as if they put all their chips into the open world, and the dungeons were an afterthought. A complete reverse from, say, Spirit Tracks, where the outside world was lackluster, but the dungeons were great. Dungeons are typically a large, interconnected labyrinth with various tasks to complete across rooms, while one action tends to affect the state of another area, where each separate dungeon has its own theme, which in turn helps to tell the overall story. For example, this is where Midna and Link go to find a mirror shard. This is where Link has to calm down Valoo in order to gain the aid of the Ritos. And this is where Link has to end mass starvation in order to obtain one of the spiritual stones. But Breath of the Wild instead gave us shrines. Now, I understand the concept behind this. It's a vast, explorable world. Let's not take away from that too much. Here's some bite-sized challenges to find along the way. Finish them, then off you go. Explore some more. Seeking out these shrines truly is a magical feeling. You see a faint red glow in the distance. You traverse great plains to reach it, and when you finally do, it's a satisfying check mark on the list of all 120. You marked another small spot in this massive world, and as a reward, you get a spirit orb to upgrade yourself later, and a new fast travel location. That's all wonderful. The shrines themselves, on the other hand, leave a lot to be desired. Every shrine has the same theming, this sort of ancient technology, where everything's built of metal or stone, but there's this light blue hue encapsulating everything alongside hieroglyphic or geometric patterns, the relics of an advanced ancient society that fell for one reason or another. We've all seen something like this somewhere before. It's used to great effect throughout this game, as a reminder of the old world and the bygone ways of life since the incident that changed it all. So it's themed well, but it doesn't change alongside your progress, like in previous Zelda games, where this is a specific temple that could only be found in this specific locale. And I understand why this is. These shrines are essentially optional. There's no order in which they need to be completed, but they're not reliant on the contextual terrain around them. They're just one theme across the board, and they could theoretically be interchanged with one another. And I feel that takes from the excitement. Shrine 63 looks a lot like Shrine 107. Okay, but what about the challenge itself? Well, I can't say I don't like any of them, but not many stand out as rememberable. What I do remember is clearing the water in the Swamp Palace, or laying low in Forsaken Fortress, curing the Deku tree of his illness, or walking upside down in the Goron mines. The shrines are just puzzles to be done and then forgotten about. I'm really not raving about magnetic swings, moving metal orbs, or yet another Guardian Scout. A lot of these shrines use the Sheikah Slate abilities, which is reasonable enough, but I really don't find these abilities fun. I'll cover that soon, but I feel like the shrines are hurt by their lack of interconnectivity. What really would have caught my attention is one massive underground dungeon that connects all the shrines together. Each part is sectioned off until you unlock it above the surface, and there's individual tasks to do at each shrine entrance, as well as larger tasks between the newly connected rooms. Even something as simple as each shrine having its own switch to flip, say 1 out of 5, so the 4 other shrines within that one's radius will need to be accessed before a new section underground is opened, leading to new challenges and new rewards. And if every shrine is connected underground, that would give a better explanation for fast travel, rather than Link just turning blue and wisping his way there. Now, besides the shrines, we are given the divine beasts. Initially, I was excited for these, thinking they would better fulfill my dungeon fix. But they didn't. They're more involved than the shrines, but didn't really hit the mark in my opinion. Your task is pretty straightforward and feels urgent, which story-wise it is, but there's not that, say, comfortable feeling I get from most dungeons, where you get familiar with each room and the techniques needed to continue on.
You'll need a map.
You're gonna need a map.
And the first thing you'll want to do is find yourself a map.
You'll need a map to find your way around.
There are 4 terminals remaining.
There are 4 terminals remaining.
There are 4 terminals remaining.
There are 4 terminals remaining. I'm counting on you.
Basically, your goal is to activate 5 terminals, each gated by a little puzzle. Some of these are still individualized puzzles, but many times you progress by simply altering the beast through the map screen. The 3D map and movable beast parts are neat, but they can get a bit tedious, though Naboris is the only one that actually feels interconnected with its electricity puzzle between rooms. At least we get a boss and a heart at the end, though the game also took a hit on bosses. There's tough enemies out there, and even some mini-bosses, but they only really offer treasures as a prize. I mean, if this guy beats me down enough times, I'll just give up and go, since the rewards aren't really worth it after a while. But a dungeon boss has to be defeated, so I'll pinpoint his weaknesses and make sure to get it done. There's Guardian Scouts that get harder depending on the shrine, but I'll be fine if I skip out on a shrine or 2. That leaves these 4 Blight Ganons as the only true bosses, that you then refight in the castle. And then the final showdown. So I'm hoping to see more boss variety in the next game, alongside more fully fleshed out dungeons. My final word on dungeons will lead into my next point of discussion: special abilities. In traditional Zelda format, you'll enter a dungeon, take note of objects or paths you can't interact with yet, then at some point, you'll come across an equipable item that will change how you will take on the remainder of that dungeon. You get your introduction to this new tool, then it becomes the star of the show until you're out, and will continue to be used as needed going forward in your quest. You come back to these old rooms with a new tactic, and reach new rooms as well, really keeping exploration fresh within each dungeon. The shrines can't do this, as they're just too small. There's no new paths with the context of a new item, just in, then out. But the outside is where these new item abilities really shine. Just like how we go back to older rooms with a new tactic within a dungeon, the outside world is often set up like this as well. Remember those stones near Kakariko? Remember those protruding branches at the Forest Haven? Remember those small pits south of Bottle Grotto? This is my favorite part about Zelda games: the rewards of returning to familiar grounds. It's a great accomplishment discovering something new, especially when it's in a place you've been before. Some might dread this and call it backtracking, but from my perspective, it's a good backtracking. Finding something fresh and new alongside something old and familiar. I'll return to this point when the time comes, but Breath of the Wild isn't totally void of item abilities. As mentioned before, the paraglider is an insanely satisfying feature of this game, but the rest of our item abilities come in the form of the Sheikah Slate. It has 4 basic runes, giving us remote detonating bombs, stasis to stop a specific item in time, cryonis to freeze and build pillars, and magnesis to interact with metal objects. Now, I don't personally find these as fun as using the actual obtained tools from other titles. There's no hookshot, or Pegasus boots, power gloves, or this weird spinning disc. Though you do get a motorcycle in the DLC. Bombs are standard, and the remote is nice, and the magnesis is useful at times, but the Sheikah Slate abilities don't have the same impact. This time stop is kinda lame. And might I add that you get all 4 of these in quick succession within your first couple hours of the game, before even leaving the Great Plateau. In a more linear progression, every major roadblock will challenge you in a culmination of everything you've learned up to that point. Here, with shrines, beasts, tower puzzles, and temperature management, you simply refer to what you've learned back on that Great Plateau. Magnesis, Time Stop, Ice Pillar, Bomb. At first, these ice shards had me scratching my head. Is there an item nearby, or an ability to learn? No. Flint and logs build a fire. Ice melts. It's a cool interaction with the world's elements, but it's learned immediately. For the most part, I'm not going into the world looking for new paths to open up with a certain ability, and that's a shame. The world truly is open, and I feel that has some downsides, though we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. As far as items go, I'd like to have seen more variation, more interaction. Sure, there's rocks I can bomb down, but more to actually do, not just see. What's the point of going everywhere if the roads to get there are just as feasible as the next? Add some more item interaction, and that makes the exploring that much more fulfilling. Survival. Alright, we're out of the dungeons with little to our person. We're gonna need some way to survive. I was stoked to hear Breath of the Wild was gonna have survival elements. I haven't played many survival games, but the concept is a fun one. Like Resident Evil 1 without the horror. Collecting resources and using them sparingly, knowing danger lurks at every corner, and you're never fully safe. Don't Starve is a game I adore. I'm not great at it, but just the process of building up your environment using only what's around you is fun. So this being implemented into a Zelda title, this is gonna be awesome, right? Well, it didn't really matter much. You could cook foods, but they're only needed in a couple situations. And these foods can heal you, but I've got fast travel, which is often just easier. And these foods can give you a boost in certain stats, but many times, I was just fine without. So in the next Breath of the Wild, I'd like them to either go all out with survival, or scrap it entirely. Give Link a hunger meter, give him exhaustion, plan around sleep, build defenses around your camp, and try not to get invaded. And have the gameplay center around this, so it's not overbearing, but yet it doesn't feel unnecessary. Or just simply get rid of it, collect hearts from slain enemies, and leave the food alone. Though if we're gonna talk survival, that means staying alive. And the best defense is a good offense. So weapons are our next topic. Breath of the Wild tried something new with its weapons. Link has nothing. And if he's gonna last in a fight, he needs something, anything to attack with. A tree branch will do, maybe a torch, or a ladle. Though many weapons can be picked off the corpse of our slain enemies. A Boko Club or a Lazal Boomerang. And this is all really cool. Until it breaks. So in one sense, this could encourage you to try out so many different weapons, but often I'd just save my best for later because I knew that they'd break. Why use a Lionel Crusher on a Bokoblin when it might suit me better later? But often later never comes. I go through the game using weak weapons because I know the better weapons are few and far between. Obtaining a great new weapon is an awesome feeling, but that's stunted by the fact that it inevitably has to break. That limit has you going from feeling empowered to being cautious. So I think a better solution is this. In Breath of the Wild 2, give us less weapons, but make them more refined. A certain type of weapon is found in a certain type of location, and when it breaks, we can repair it. Why should we find and craft only food? Besides the occasional tunic upgrade, we can't craft better equipment, so let's instead collect materials and use them to fix our broken weapons. So instead of just switching to your next best one, you can lay low a second and give new life to that fire rod. Or if you're out of materials, you know it's just a matter of time before you collect the right ones. Maybe even give us permanent upgrades so that fire rod becomes a meteor rod if we craft it the right way. And expanding on that, the final upgrade could be weapon invulnerability, where it will no longer break at all. The Master Sword was great to pick up, because I knew I'd always have it, even when it timed out. So here's another approach. Link starts with one permanent basic sword. It does neutral damage. Over time, you collect new swords. Each one is elemental, and we build the whole enemy base around this elemental mechanic. Like Pokemon, but in a sword. So here's the Forest Sword. It does grass damage. It's effective against water enemies, and can be repaired using sticks and leaves. And we do something similar with fire, ice, lightning, etc. And these can all be permanent, only needing a recharge through crafting. I don't know, I just feel the Breath of the Wild weapon system is a good idea, it just wasn't implemented in a great way. Sure, we could always go back to the standard swordplay, but if it's got Breath of the Wild in the title, it's more fitting to have an expansive range to our combat tools. Just to be clear, there is a limited form of weapon crafting with the Akala Scientist. Though it's a small selection, and it's only done with ancient materials. Those gifted weapons from the village leaders can also be reforged, but I'd like to see this extended to all weapon types and to be able to craft it out in the field when needed. Okay, let's round this out. Breath of the Wild's standout feature, open world. Open world is exciting, exploration is enchanting, and new discoveries are fulfilling. But a grand new direction often comes with some trade-offs. Earlier, I stated about our newfound tools encouraging backtracking. I said, but from my perspective, it's a good backtracking, finding something fresh and new along something old and familiar. It's sometimes for optional bonuses, but often sets the pace by putting necessary boundaries for us to surpass in due time. Yes, boundaries, a blasphemous term for the open world. There's much debate to be had over the pros and cons in a linear versus non-linear experience. Linear is more handcrafted, guiding you to certain places at a certain time to see specific instances and having proper progression in difficulty and abilities. You see what you're meant to see, but you're more constricted in what you can do. Non-linear is more free. You go where you want, do what you want, when you want to do it. Skip certain aspects. You tailor this game to your own liking, but can miss out on a more intentional experience. Neither one is inherently good or bad, and everyone has their preferences, but they can both be used to great effect to tell the story in a certain way. I mean, nearly all books are linear, but choose your own adventure books can sometimes be more fun. I'm definitely one to lean towards linear, telling a certain story in a specific way, and many games are good at disguising just how linear they are. Most Zelda games even feature a required order to an extent. Find a way to leave your starting point. Do this dungeon, then go over here. Then you have your choice of these dungeons, but it's only after you complete all those you can move to your last set. Breath of the Wild has a start, the Great Plateau, and an end, Hyrule Castle, and everything in between is essentially optional. You can go straight to Ganon if you want. It's gonna be real difficult, but you can do it. And that in itself is real cool. Though in doing this approach, you kinda make everything in between less significant. Each of their respective issues will revolve around the divine beasts, but Link is already there to tame the divine beasts anyway, so the act of helping them becomes even less significant. And if you don't have time to save their kingdom, well, that's okay too. They'll understand. You can decide after your second divine beast that you're ready. You can choose to do as few shrines as possible, and having that choice is great. But for someone who likes to do everything possible within a game, it sort of cheapens the experience. I already know I'm going to do everything I can, but because all quests and shrines are meant to be done in any order, there's a lack of meaningful progression. Sure, some areas are harder than others. Sure, there's a couple of roadblocks, like the snowy mountain cold, but altogether, it's a less intentional feeling and leaves the progression feeling a bit empty. I'm gonna take a guess that even though you have all the choice you want, most players went from the plateau to the dueling peaks, then towards Zora's domain, and worked counterclockwise. At least that's what I did, and it really wouldn't take much away if that same route was instead an objective. I can only go one direction at a time anyway, and if my experience along that route was more refined, I think that's for the better. But here, I'll give some detail to the situation. Heading east, I was enchanted by this new adventure. I spent so much time climbing these twin mountains before actually heading into town. The exploration was great. And further on, I learned about horses. From here, I continued on. I then headed for the tower in the distance, and it was a fun little trip there. I now know there's a nearby town, so I head there. They tell me of their troubles, and I find a way to help out. I tame the divine beast, and they wish me well. I then head towards another tower, which leads me to another town. I learn of their issues, then find a way to resolve them. Tame a divine beast, then I'm sent on my way. Tower, get there. Town, problem, solve it. Divine beast, so long. Tower, reach it. New town, problem, solved. Divine beast, goodbye. Then on to Hyrule Castle. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I caught on to this pattern fairly quickly. It was still fun to explore around and reach new areas, but the magic was gone. But funny enough, my more appreciated moments were when I had to do something, like finding a way to dress up to gain access to the Gerudo village. The rest just started to feel meaningless. Sure, I grew stronger from completing shrines, but I don't like shrines. Sure, I could climb and glide, but to where? I could find little Korok seeds, but with 900 of these things spread across the world, they stopped feeling special. It's a cool little acknowledgement that you found a spot they wanted you to, but how about something more useful? Or how about something more visual? I remember finding this giant sword in the Gerudo Highlands, and that was an incredible find. It was something that immediately drew my attention and made me want to reach it from a distance, and without even knowing if it's meant for some quest later on, it gave me a sense of wonder. Sure, I can stumble upon some trees arranged in a circle, and it will draw me near, but there's no mystery. It's Korok. There is a lot of land to cover and things to find along the way, but not to the extent that I'd expect in such a massive world with an emphasis on exploration. I can explore for hours and still be content, but what am I really accomplishing? So from Breath of the Wild 2, I of course still want an open world, but maybe a more refined route to take as an objective, while still having the freedom to go wherever. More to interact with in this open world. More collectibles that aren't Korok seeds or limited use weapons. Utilize the camera more, like KH3 Lucky Emblems. Find little trinkets with a finite number, like the figurines in Minish Cap. Give us more weird minigames that aren't just replaying an objective, now with a time limit. And many more notable side quests, like the Terrytown quest. I stated this before, but it's worth reiterating. I do like Breath of the Wild, but I truly don't understand all the hype behind it. It was a great experience at first, but didn't keep that momentum, and it sacrificed many gameplay elements that made me love this series. You could say they needed to try something new, but clearly this format has continued to work game after game. Pushing for a Zelda game without dungeons or abilities is like asking for a Sonic game without speed, or a Mario game without levels, or Doom without guns. To me, dungeons are a qualifying aspect of a Zelda game, and it just feels wrong without them. Nintendo has kept Zelda feeling fresh over the years with a flooded world, a wolf transformation, seasons changing, and origami? All while keeping the fundamentals intact. Exploration is the name of the game in this one, but the new direction is only a breath of fresh air the first time through. In my own opinion, a great game is even better the second time through. But scroll through any related comment threads and you'll see one recurring statement. I wish I could play Breath of the Wild for the first time again. And yeah, that's likely hyperbolic to say how much they enjoyed the experience, but I feel a lot of the draw is the initial discovery. In my second playthrough, I realized the replayability offers limited returns. Now this may sound crazy, since the play in any order formula practically screams replayable, but it didn't really do much for me. In more linear games, it's the progression that carries you through, so a second playthrough, especially with a New Game Plus, will help any story beats or events be further cemented in your mind as you revisit them. And there's games that change completely in a replay, like these here. Different powers with the opposing ending, different levels depending on your mission choice, a completely different turn of events based on each separate decision you make. Breath of the Wild, different order for 4 challenges, and a bevy of additional optional distractions you may or may not want to do. I did a sort of minimal second run, basically just going after the 4 beasts, and since progression isn't really a factor, I stayed away from extras at first, only did enough shrines to mark my locations, and gained 3 hearts, and I only used weapons and materials I picked up on the way. I ran from most battles, I didn't increase stamina once, and I only really spent rupees on outfits for each area, and much of that currency was from smashing and selling stones, or breaking Goron pots. And in this mostly minimal run, I didn't really hit much difficulty with the exception of Thunderblight Ganon, where I only then farmed some hardy durian. Sure, I still had the big bad boss at the end, but all of my main objectives were cleared with ease, and the only thing that stands between me and the ending is how many of the optional extras do I want to do to give me the edge in battle. No more events or big landmarks to achieve. And all of that is fine, I don't hate the game for it. If every game was the same, things wouldn't be much fun. This is just one aspect I hope they stray away from in the next title. I gotta be honest, I wasn't stoked to hear that they were planning to make a Breath of the Wild 2. I mean, it makes sense they would, as a business decision, based off the massive success of Breath of the Wild 1. But my concern was that if they keep doing Breath of the Wild games, it will come about by sacrificing the traditional Zelda style I love so much. I mean, do we really want a Breath of the Wild 3 as opposed to a brand new experience in a brand new world? I don't know. But Nintendo has shown traditional Zelda some love with 2 releases since Breath of the Wild, with Link's Awakening Remake, which is surprising but welcomed, and then a port of Skyward Sword, which is good to see. So maybe I shouldn't be too concerned about the future of the series. So in my opinion, for Breath of the Wild 2 to be truly great, they have to merge the best aspects of the traditional series with the best aspects of the open world Breath of the Wild. Then, I'm sure I'll feel the same way about Breath of the Wild 2 as many others have felt towards Breath of the Wild 1. But I think that's all that's to be said on this. Obviously, Breath of the Wild 2 is already in development, and any ideas they're implementing would already be in place. Not that they'd listen to some dude on YouTube anyway. So to summarize, I guess I'll just reply in comment form. I didn't forget you, vaguely anonymous YouTube commenter. Sorry for the late reply. I just feel Mario Odyssey was a celebration of what's come before, and added on to the existing features that made the series great. While Breath of the Wild did add some groundbreaking features, it was in exchange for some mechanics I feel are integral to the series. Overall, I like the game. I just hope Breath of the Wild 2 will improve on what I see as shortcomings and make it truly the best Zelda game to date. For all fans, whether they enjoy the traditional style with expansive dungeons and progressive abilities, or they prefer the direction Breath of the Wild went with free roaming and an emphasis on exploration. Thanks for watching.